New users can learn to use an app really fast if the interface has a familiar look and feel. And on the other hand, if the interface is somewhat different to what they're normally used to, well, they can still adapt, but they might say that the experience could be better. And on that point, there's one feature in 4D on Windows that is often being talked about, and that is the Multiple Document Interface, or MDI, known for the main background window inside which all other windows are contained. And to be clear, MDI is not unique to 4D. It is a standard interface design used by other applications as well. Word 97, or Excel 2003, PowerPoint 2007. These are all MDI applications. The MDI naturally groups all windows that belong to the same application. It prevents documents from being mixed up with those that belong to another application. In that sense, MDI was designed as and continues to be a practical solution for applications that need to manage multiple documents. In recent years, however, many applications have adopted a single document interface, or SDI. Well, Outlook is one example. Word and Excel, which both started out as MDI applications, have since switched to SDI. An SDI application typically represents a single document. Perhaps the difference between the two options, it could be explained like this. MDI makes it easier for the user to switch between multiple documents within an application. SDI, by contrast, makes it easier for the user to switch applications. SDI support in 4D has long been the #1 feature request, well, for many years actually, which is why we're very pleased to announce that SDI mode in 4D is finally here. Now, on the technical side, this was a huge commitment. The entire user interface layer had to be totally rewritten to remove any dependencies on the Artura Mac2Win library, which was a core component of 4D. Now, to see this exciting new feature in action, please watch the following demo. So here we have a typical 4D application. We have an employer table and a list form displaying the current selection of that table. And each record can be displayed in a detailed form. We also have another table, I think it's a products table. Again, the list form displays the current selection, and each record can be displayed in a detailed form. Now, you could say that each list form and each detailed form represents a digital document. And in that sense, this application is designed to manage multiple documents. Now, if we switch to design mode, and go to database settings, there you are, you'll notice that there is a new checkbox in the interface page. Use SDI mode on Windows is an option, a new option, available for engine-merged applications on Windows 64-bit. So we're going to activate that option and start building a custom application. So that method actually calls the command build application. So you see that a new folder has been created on the desktop, and that's going to contain our newly built custom application. Here it is. So let's go inside the folder and double-click to launch. Okay. Wait. So here you are, a 4D application running in SDI mode. It's the exact same application, except we no longer have that background window. We just have the initial splash window. And you might notice that the splash window now has its own menu bar. This menu bar used to belong to the background window. Like I said, it's the exact same application, so we can display list of employees just as we did before. But because we don't have that background window, this window can go anywhere on the desktop. There you are. And you can select and open multiple records, just as we did before. These. Record, record, record. There. You see, running an application in SDI mode doesn't limit your application to a single document. You can still manage multiple documents. And what's cool about running an application in SDI is that each of these document window are nicely represented in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. See, it's a nice integration with the system. And indeed, there are many advantages to running an application in SDI, and we'd like to consider just 3 of them. The first benefit of running an application in SDI is that it's much easier to interact with the desktop. For example, you could take a picture field and drag and drop to the desktop, or do the reverse and import a file from the desktop. You see, drag and drop is so much easier when you don't have that background window. With a little bit of coding, you could even export a single record in a public format that can be imported in an external application. See, so interact with the desktop, that's the first benefit of running an application in SDI. The second benefit of running an application in SDI is that it's much easier to work with multiple applications at the same time. Now, in this demo, we are going to use a spreadsheet application alongside our 4D application. Now, this spreadsheet actually is designed to talk to the 4D database using a REST interface. See, as we enter some values, these are actually product numbers in the A column, you see that values have been fetched from the database to populate the other columns. In fact, the REST API is called whenever there's a data change detected on the leftmost A column, like so. Okay. Now, we still have the C column, the third column that's empty, so we're going to fill out the spreadsheet on the right side of the screen. And you can see that the values typed in the column are sent over to the database and stored on the left side of the screen. So we're working on the spreadsheet on the right half of the screen, and we can check the database on the left half of the screen. Now, this kind of interaction operation used to be quite challenging in 4D because the MDI did not leave much space for multiple applications to coexist on the same screen. The user often had no other choice but to hide one application whilst working on the other. And that brings us to the third benefit of running an application in SDI, which is that the app can now take full advantage of connected multiple screens. You see, many users have found that one of the best ways to increase productivity is to connect a second display to their computer, or even a third one. And increasing the size of the desktop makes it so much easier to work with many applications that run many windows. Now, when an application is running in 4D SDI mode, any window displayed by 4D can be moved to any location on the virtual desktop. The extra monitors could be connected to the left or right or above or below the main screen, and the window can go anywhere on the virtual desktop. And that's going to be a huge boost to productivity. Okay, so to recap, yes, you can now run your 4D application in SDI mode. And there are many benefits. First, it's much easier to interact with the desktop. It's much easier to work with multiple applications on the same screen. It's much easier to work with multiple applications on multiple screens. Now, if you like this presentation, please check out our breakout session, which will be held in this room right after lunch. Now, I want to move on to the next topic, which is simplification. Now, one way to keep the interface clean and simple is to define help tips. Now, help tips are displayed whenever a mouse pointer is positioned on a certain part of window. And they reveal a piece of information that is hidden or abbreviated on the screen. Help tips remain visible for a maximum of 5 seconds on Windows or 10 seconds on Mac. And in 4D, that duration is set to 12 seconds on both platforms. But what if the user feels that the duration is too long or perhaps too short? What if some users find tips to be somewhat excessive or even disruptive? And what about list boxes? The text displayed as help tips within the context of a list box is always the same. It's the same text regardless of which part of the list box object is being specified by the user. But would it be more practical if the tip was specific to the column or the row that's being pointed to by the user? So please watch the following demo. Now here we have a list box displaying the weather forecast for several cities. Now as the mouse pointer slowly moves across the rows, you'll see that help tips are displayed, and the content of that help tip is actually dynamically changing to correspond to the weather symbol displayed inside each cell. Now you might think that each of these cells have their own help tip defined, but actually that is not the case. When you go inside the object method of this list box, you will see that the form event on mouse move is being used, and the command object set help tip is being called to set the help tip for this list box on the fly. You'll also notice that the command listbox get cell position is being used, which is a command that would normally return the position of the cell that was selected or clicked by the user, but here it's being used with a new syntax, which will take the mouse X, mouse Y coordinates as its parameters and then return the column and row number of the cell specified by those coordinates. By combining these features, it is now possible to have a contextualized help tip for each column or each row or even each cell if necessary. So that's a cool new feature. Now, you might notice that the display duration is much shorter than the default 12 seconds. And that's thanks to a new database parameter called tips duration, which allows you to define the exact display duration or the maximum display duration for the help tips feature. For instance, you might want to define a longer duration if, for example, an object is defined to display a very detailed explanation as its help tip. And that's not all. There's another new database parameter added, which is a tips enabled, which allows you to enable or disable this feature globally. Now, when you switch off the help tips feature, they are never displayed in anywhere within the application. See? And there's actually a third database parameter, which is tips delay, which allows you to define for how long the mouse needs to stay still before tips are displayed. Setting it to 0, for example, means that tips are displayed as soon as the mouse stops moving. There you are. And by contrast, setting it to, let's say, 60, that's 60 ticks, means that there's a 1 second delay before tips are displayed. Okay, so to recap, you have fine control over the help tips feature. Yeah, you can set the display duration thanks to a new database parameter. You could also define the delay before the tips are displayed. And for list boxes, you have fine control. You can even define a tip at the cell level. So that's a new feature, better control over help tips. Now, I want to spend a few more minutes to focus, actually, on list boxes. You see, every new version since V11 has added a new practical feature related to the listbox object, and our latest R releases are no exceptions. as we just saw in the previous section, you can now define help tips for each cell if necessary. And for every single object property for a Listbox object, there are now ways to access them by code. There are getters and setters for every single object property of a Listbox, which is a huge deal. And then there is also another new feature, actually, which allows you to customize how selected lines are highlighted. Now, on this final point, please watch the following demo. Oh, okay, let's vote over this slide. Anyway. So there's a demo. So you see, here we have a list box which has alternate background colors. So there, each line is a dark color, light color, and so on. And you also notice that the cell or the columns on each side, on the left and right side, have dynamic or data-driven background colors, which helps the user really to focus on the data, whether it's a negative value, a positive value, and so on. Now, it's a very good-looking list box. The problem is that as soon as the user starts selecting some lines by clicking on them, for instance, they're all painted blue because blue is the system's highlight color. Now, the system's highlight color can be problematic sometimes because, for instance, when the window is inactive, it's hard to read it because a light font color on a light gray background is not very friendly. So to solve this problem, a new object property has been added called hide selection highlight. That's right, hide selection highlight. Now, when you hide the selection highlight, what happens is that the user can still select lines by clicking on them or using the keyboard, but their appearances do not change automatically. As developer, you will be in charge of highlighting those selected lines. If the data source of a Listbox is an array, then you would update the font color array or the background color array. If the data source is a table, then you would use the font color expression or the background color expression. Either way, you have total control. For example, instead of applying a solid background color, you might want to increase the saturation level. This way, you can still keep your data-driven coloring scheme and also respect the active or inactive state of the window. There you are. You can switch back to system highlight at any time. System highlight, or you can activate your custom highlighting at any time because, like I said, this is an object property, and because this is a list box, you will always have getters and setters. So, to recap. Yeah, you can fully customize how selected lines are highlighted in a list box. And this being an object property, you have full access by code. Now, all these features I've briefly covered, like running an application in SDI mode, or fine control over help tips, or customizing how selected lines are highlighted. These are all features that are designed to help you add that extra polish to the user interface. So I hope you like them and use them to deliver nice user experience.